feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled Movie Review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Margin.
This episode belongs in a museum.
Today we are reviewing an Indiana Jones movie. Who would have thought? James Mangold's Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Completely spoiler free. We're putting this review out before the movie comes out because it's a big one. The embargo's already up, so we thought we'd put it up. So no spoilers on this one. Whether we cover spoilers at a future date, I doubt it, but we'll dance around things for this episode. Eric, how are you?
Matt, it's a Sunday. We're recording this. You're about to go on a vacation to Vegas. I spent all of Friday clothes shopping for both TIFF and Aruba in October.
Nice.
So it's been nice. It's been a bit of a renewal in a way, and this is thematic to, I think, what we're going to review, where there's both the nostalgic component for people that loved Indiana Jones growing up, but there's also this aspect of trying to renew or revive a franchise that has been around for so long now and has also influenced so many other movies, especially, I know you're more of a fan of National Treasure than you are of Indiana Jones.
And Uncharted.
Yes.
So, I mean, those are the two biggest Indiana Jones ripoffs. And ironically, really like both of those. And Indiana Jones has never been my thing. So whatever that says, and then whatever you want to use that for what my opinion on this movie is, whatever. But yeah, National Treasure, which was never my thing when they came out, but I watched them later and I was like, these are so stupid. And Nick Cage is amazing. And then with Uncharted, I guess because of the more modern setting and because they were video games, obviously that didn't work in movie form. We saw that. But the games were always so entertaining and they were just blatant Tomb Raider. I mean, even Tomb Raider is an Indiana Jones clone to an extent. So it's funny now going back and reviewing an Indiana Jones film, which feels kind of a bit surreal, right? Because I think, both of us, I worked at Cineplex when the last Indiana Jones movie came out. That was right before you started reviewing movies, or were you already reviewing?
I was reviewing movies at that point because it's 2006 when I started. So I reviewed The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull Vodka.
Look at you. You've reviewed 2 Indiana Jones movies. You're old as fuck, bro.
I know.
No, I mean, we're both the same age.
Well,
that's working at Cineplex.
I cut you off there because I was reading Roger Ebert's essay on Raiders of the Lost Ark last night, and the thing that made me so depressed reading that is that Spielberg made Raiders of the Lost Ark when he was 34, so he already had Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Sugarland Express, Duel, all before 34.
That's depressing.
I know. I mean, Spielberg obviously is a producer on this, and this is the first of the Indiana Jones movies that doesn't have him as a director. So I think your metaphor actually sums this up perfectly, whether or not it's positive or negative. I think what you said on Twitter, and if you could repeat that, I think that kind of
that's how I was gonna kick it off, is so take this with a grain of salt. Not the biggest Indiana Jones fan, but I've always been fine with the movies. I've enjoyed them. I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark in a theater for the first time maybe 10 years ago, probably after Crystal Skull came out, but they re-released Raiders for which they keep doing over and over again. And then I rewatched them all a few years ago, and I've always thought they were okay, or they're good movies objectively. It's just was never really my thing. However, so this movie, I'll kick it off by saying I enjoyed it, but what it feels like to me, and you guys can go back and read my tweet, I don't know exactly how I worded it, is like a cover band of a rock and roll Hall of Fame band and that you're going to see live, that it's playing the hits. It feels almost right. You're having a good time because you like the music that they're playing. However, it still feels like something it's like an imitation, right? Like, or it's just someone trying to do what came before it. While you're like, I'm having fun watching this, but it's not necessarily exactly the thing that I loved before. You're still seeing, Harrison Ford, you got John Williams. It really feels like it's the greatest hits of Indiana Jones thrown into a movie. So yeah, I compared it to like if you went out to Las Vegas or something like that, and some sort of cover band of an amazing band is playing like their greatest hits album, and you're like, you go, you spend a little bit of money, and you're like, yeah, that was enjoyable. Like I think I had a good time. I don't know if I'm gonna like 5 years down the line be like, fucking remember that cover band we saw in Vegas? It's like, no, I went out and I watched them. I enjoyed it because I liked some of the music that they were playing, but it didn't feel like the actual band. So that was a little bit more wordy of what I tried to put in a nice little package on Twitter. But like, so for me, I enjoyed myself. And even with someone who doesn't have the nostalgia for Indiana Jones, like I found myself going, okay, I see they're bringing back these characters or taking these moments or, following that kind of formula that worked for three of the four movies. And I'm someone who doesn't even hate Crystal Skull because, again, I went into it not with this extra baggage. I just went into it as a movie because I didn't really care about the character or, yeah, there's some ridiculous things that happen, the nuking the fridge moment and all that kind of stuff. But I just, none of that shit bothered me because the aliens and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, sorry, interdimensional
Interdimensional beings.
beings. My bad, my bad, my bad. So I just like, I've never had that attachment. So I went into this without that baggage as well. I like James Mangold. He is a hit or miss filmmaker, but I love Logan. So like, I will give him kind of the benefit of the doubt moving forward on especially big franchise filmmaking. Um, it starts off really strong. I think the opening sequence, which is a flashback, that's not spoilers, but like, is really, really fun and exciting and does feel like, Indiana Jones, classic Indiana Jones. Some of the best de-aging I think I've ever seen in a movie. Like you can tell Lucasfilm has been working really hard on this to try to get this right. And I'm okay with it when the actor is in the movie, they're giving their consent, they're doing the performance, they're just de-aging them. It's gotten better over time. I remember, it used to look horrible. Now obviously you can still tell at moments, but it is getting better. I think Lucasfilm, with what they did in Book of Boba Fett with Luke Skywalker and what they did here with Harrison Ford, I think are two of the better examples of de-aging that they've done. I think that opening sequence is really exciting. The rest of the film kind of plays out pretty formulaic to what you would expect a Indiana Jones movie to be. So that's what I mean by those greatest hits. It is like kind of a long chase sequence. It's kind of nonstop in its pacing, but then it kind of lulls you into this trance that, for better or for worse, I think you could lean one way or the other and go, it's not really doing anything new or exciting or original. It's just, like I said, playing the hits and doing those things and going through the motions. Or it can lull you into like, I'm having a good time. I'm just shut off your brain and watch, some fun action, even though Harrison Ford is obviously, what's he pushing?
He's 80.
He's 80. Yeah, I thought I was gonna say pushing 80, but he's 80. But he you can really tell he gives a shit about this franchise and this character. And I don't know. I found it like a fun send off. I liked Phoebe Waller-Bridge. I liked Mads Mikkelsen. The cast is great. Some people are kind of wasted with like Antonio Banderas and even Boyd Holbrook, who I really liked in Logan. I thought, and he's playing kind of a similar character in this, or like his vibes are similar to that character, but I didn't feel like he stood out as much in this. I thought the action was okay. Yeah, so it kind of lulled me into this trance of like, I was never bored, but I was never like, fuck yeah, this movie's awesome. It was just like this. It was just kind of like this. Yeah. Okay. Uh, and but I mean that in sort of a positive way, as someone who isn't going to get disappointed by this, because I don't have any attachment to it, where I'm just judging it as it's a little long, I guess. And as
It's
this
2
statement
hours
is a
and
little,
34
yeah.
minutes.
As this statement is long winded, so is this movie. I think it does kind of run out of steam by the end. Um, I do like what they tackle with time and stuff like that, even though it's that classic, MacGuffin we've seen in a bazillion different movies and even Indiana Jones. Like, it's just, again, classic. Here's tick off the box of what we need in this movie. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I had a decent time with this. And yeah, so I'm curious on your thoughts, Eric, because you are more of an Indiana Jones fan than I am. So you go ahead.
Yeah, I I mean, I literally, like, on the right side of me have the original 81 poster,
Yeah.
that my dad got when he first saw it in the
Yeah. My
theater.
Uncle Mark has had that poster up in his house for the longest time, too.
Yeah, and he was just obsessed with it, and his obsession with it, as my dogs are barking, trickled down to us as kids, me and my brothers, and we kind of inherited that love of the franchise over the years. Those first three movies mean an awful lot in terms of nostalgia and growing up, and looking at Harrison Ford as like one of the great movie stars of all time. I love him as Han Solo, but I think Indiana Jones, even though both characters are reactionary to the world around them, there was just something about him as Indiana Jones that it was all front and center. It wasn't creating other characters that you would basically move around with and sort of support their journey as you go along, like a Luke Skywalker or Princess Leia. It was all Indy, and Indy would have
Yeah.
people that he would meet up with, in these adventures, and supporting roles would be kind of smaller. And it would just be characters overall, thinking that, like, they would be brought in for a certain plot development or device to kind of be triggered or to kind of move the story along, but it was always about Harrison Ford. And you look at, like, that period with Indiana Jones, Star Wars, and Blade Runner. He was one of the biggest movie stars ever. And so, the films have always been taking the best parts of adventure serials and kind of
Yeah.
just making a really fun pulpy B movie, but at the same time having someone like Spielberg direct those first three movies, and even the fourth one to a degree. You have a great technician as well. Like, he's a guy that understands how to kind of play with exposition and narrative structure, and keeps things flowing at a pace that's both intriguing to the audience but also feels like it's economically sound. And so, like, he's able to move you from one location to the other, and so forth. I agree with you. The opening sequence is the best aspect or component of this movie. It does feel the closest to what the original three movies are. And when you're watching that sequence, I do agree with you to a certain extent about the de-aging of Harrison Ford. I think it's like Robert De Niro in The Irishman, where we have a reference point of what he actually looked like as a younger man. So you kind of have to put that aside a little bit. And where it doesn't work is in the voice and in some
Yeah.
of the
You're right there.
movements. I
Yeah.
think I think when Ford starts moving and talking, that's where the illusion starts to break of the de-aged younger version. And what also helps it a little bit is the way that it's shot. It's a sequence that takes place at night, so you're able to use shadows and kind
Yeah.
of dimly lit, saturated sequences. A lot of it takes place in a moving train that we see, or outside of a moving train that's going through the French Alps. And this is at the end, near the end of World War II. So that kind of benefits as well, with kind of hiding maybe some of the plastic kind of
Yeah.
qualities that the de-age, I want to say makeup, but it is kind of a form of makeup that hides those kind of uncanny valley qualities in the character. And you can see it a little bit in Mads Mikkelsen, because I think they did it
Yeah.
to him as well. um but that sequence, I think, works overall. The other moment in that scene that I think it kind of shows a little bit of the time we're in now in terms of technology is when he's on the top of the train and he's moving towards the cart where Mads Mikkelsen and Toby Jones's character are in. And Toby Jones plays one of Harrison Ford's acquaintances and friends, and you learn more about him and his backstory as well. And he's kind of almost like a Marcus in this storyline, you know, a Denham Elliott, or I mean, Jonathan Rhys-Davies is in this, so you know that's also kind of feels like that fan service kind of quality of like, we need to have a moment for the audience to like audibly cheer in a weird sitcom-y kind of way when you introduce
Yeah.
those kind of characters, or even
And here's the thing. I know so little about Indiana Jones. I go, was this guy in the
yeah,
other ones? Okay.
he was in 1 and 3, but you
Yeah.
would probably
So
know him better as Lord of the Rings, as the dwarf. Why am I forgetting his
oh yeah
name?
yeah yeah. Gimli? No.
Gimli.
Yeah
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so
How the fuck did I remember that?
I don't know, but yeah, it's one of well, you just saw it recently. So
Yeah, that's true.
so when you see him come back and like that moment, and I'm not spoiling anything because he's in the trailer.
It's in the trailer, yeah.
It does feel like, oh, this is a moment for you as the audience to react to this.
Isn't the whole movie kind of that?
It is, but it does feel like those moments in particular, like, look who we're bringing back, you know, the character that you loved in this movie that was there to help. Yeah, exactly. And as the story progresses, its themes on aging are very apparent. You know, you have someone in 1969 during the space age as, you know, Apollo 11 goes to the moon, where, you know, Ford's character is retiring, you know, from his job as a professor, and you have someone that's looking, you know, at the past and how people aren't as interested in the past as they are in the present moment. Even the way that the choreography or the staging of a parade in New York is framed, you have Harrison Ford riding a horse being chased by Boyd Holbrook on a motorcycle. So, you know, the old way of escaping
cool,
a situation. No, it's I think it works
like that
in
scene
terms
too,
of a conceptual piece, but it's also very much okay. Like you can see a guy that's, you know, in a modern environment in a city using a horse to ride into a subway station and then being chased by a guy on a motorcycle. So again, like he's using, you know, past methods in order to achieve a goal. And again, you know, what Mangold is doing here as a journeyman director is he's taking elements of Spielberg's style of filmmaking, which is to take a set piece that looks almost innocuous or it doesn't have any real threat to it going on, but then as the scene kind of progresses, you'll see, you know, things that you wouldn't expect to be a threat to start kind of forming. Like even just the idea of like shelves in a you know, archival sort of library like being toppled. It's like those things that like just like looking at them or walking in a room, they're safe, they're secure, there's nothing going on, but then when they play out in a scene, they become more of an obstacle for both the hero and the adversaries to play in. I also think someone like Boyd Holbrook is an interesting, I think the whole Nazi thing is actually kind of interesting in bringing that back, because that's always been a part of the three movies, well, at least 1 and 3, where, you know, it was always about, you know, sticking it to the Nazis, and it's a low-hanging fruit, but it's a great thing. But there was a point where Spielberg,
even in Crystal Skull, wasn't it?
No, it was the Soviet Union. Yeah, it was the Russians, because the nuke, the fridge, the Cold War.
Yeah,
and you would think
you're right.
That would continue on here, right? Because it is the Cold War era still. But what I find fascinating about the choice here is that Spielberg, after making Schindler's List, said that he would never make another Indiana Jones movie or film about the Nazis that was entertainment, because of having that experience and the Showa project and working on that changed his mind on things. So for Mangold and the other 4 writers, because Mangold's credited, as well as David Koepp, you have this really interesting moment that feels like it is trying to be a social commentary on even now, where you have Mads Mikkelsen representing, you know, pure evil, but then you have someone like Boyd Holbrook, who's almost a neo-Nazi, the
Yeah,
way
a
that
young,
he's,
handsome, blonde man
yeah,
that's
when he's
kind of
reading,
corrupted.
translations from English to German in that one scene, like, and those characters kind of being the Americans working with the Germans because um, Mads Mikkelsen's character has basically helped with the
Space
science
race
behind
and
the space race. So, you have this conflicting interest of policies and Mikkelsen's character hiding his true identity. And so you have the technological aspect of it. With the Phoebe Waller-Bridge stuff, you have almost a reflection of who Indiana Jones was when he was younger, even to the point of, Teddy being Phoebe Waller-Bridge's Helena Shaw, the sidekick, the way that Short Round
yeah,
was in Indiana
yep,
Jones
yep.
2, right? And even her story of how, she found him. There's a fun, if predictable, tuck chase in in Tangier that kind of plays out. Then they go to the European Mediterranean, in Greece, in Sicily, and all of that stuff feels very familiar. I think the Antonio Banderas aspect, which is also funny that you mentioned Uncharted because he's in that as well.
Yeah, yeah.
He, you know what? Like,
Wasted in both?
yes. I think there's an aspect of that I understand, where it's like you get invited to be in this franchise that maybe you grew up with or loved as a kid, and you're working with people like Harrison Ford and James Mangold, and Spielberg's producing, and Spielberg also produced The Mask of Zorro, so you have that to consider. But I think having someone like him in that role is almost too distracting because he is too big of a movie star, which is also
Right.
funny because both Harrison Ford and Antonio Banderas were in The Expendables 3, which was actually a much more fun movie, in my opinion. So you have this kind of feeling of like, oh, that's Antonio Banderas playing that. Where when you have a person like Toby Jones at the beginning, yeah, Toby Jones is a recognizable character actor, but he's not a big name. He's not
Not
a
like distracting. You might recognize him
yeah.
from Captain America and mainstream people,
Yes, yeah, or The Mist. Like I made a joke about The
Sure.
Mist. Like his aim hasn't changed since The Mist, but yeah, it's when you're watching those scenes, you're just thinking to yourself, okay, well, why is he in this movie? But then when you think about how those first four movies play out, well, there's a lot of people that he meets that come and go in Indy's life that, again, are usually plot devices or a way to move
Yeah.
the story along. It's like, oh, I know somebody that has a boat, or I know somebody that can help us
See, and
get
that
through
would
to
have
this
been,
location.
for me, that would have been a better opportunity to bring back someone from another one of the movies or something.
Well,
I don't know, to make
unfortunately, a
that
lot
little
of
bit
the
more.
actors have
Yeah, have
passed.
passed. Yeah,
Like
'cause they
Denham
would have been
Elliott's
older.
gone. Like
Yeah.
Jim
I
Broadbent's the
don't,
one guy
again,
that I thought they
yeah.
would bring back because he replaced Denham Elliott in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And
Where was my boy Ke Huy Quan, man?
Ke Huy Quan, yeah. That's, I think, something that they were, they couldn't have predicted everything
Yeah.
everywhere all at once, because that's when
Because they were shooting this at the same time, right?
yeah, and they probably had already developed the script way before. So, in hindsight or retrospect, that probably is something where, like, if they had started making it now, they would have brought him back into it. But yeah, it's one of those movies where I don't hate it. I'm not even disappointed with it. Like, I know you were talking about, like, you went with the flow for the most part. I kind of felt worn out by it, and not in an exhausting kind of way, just in a, like, I think I spent most of my disappointment or anger
On Crystal
toward
Skull.
no, well, a little bit, actually. You know what? You're not wrong with that. And that was Spielberg directing it,
Yeah,
and I think that was actually more disappointing, where it kind of did feel like a cheap imitation of something that, these guys work so hard, Lucas, Spielberg, Ford, to kind of create in the past. But then with this, I think, like, with this summer, you mentioned, like, the MacGuffin kind of being similar to other movies we've seen. We've talked about something that's very similar in Transformers: Rise of the Beasts, being in this as well. You have an aspect of the Flash as well, and I think that's where I spent most of my anger,
Right, with
frustration
Keaton,
towards
yeah.
with Keaton, because that was another childhood favorite, and I almost felt like I was a little burnt out in that, where this is just like, Yeah, fine, whatever.
So
And
it's an
I feel,
encore, right?
yeah, I
That's
hate
another good
feeling that
comparison.
too.
Is like an encore performance where you're like, all right, one more song, and then they play a song that you're like, all right,
Well,
okay,
it's like
time to
going to
go
see
home.
Journey, the band Journey, to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame thing or the cover band
Yeah,
thing. It's like going to see Journey, but you're not getting Steve Perry. I can't believe I'm comparing Steven Spielberg to Steve Perry, but Steve
yeah,
Perry of Journey, and then you get the guy who,
replace them,
yeah, and he
right?
has a good voice and everything, and it sounds fine, and it looks
Again, it's
good, but it's not the same.
and you'll have varying degrees of enjoyment, right? Where I went with the flow and I was like, you know what, that was fine. Like fine in a good way for me, where you could go, that was fine in an indifferent way or fine in a not so great way, right? And I think that's where this movie is threading the needle is like in the you're either gonna fall on the like, I enjoyed myself, or like,
Or
it's
the
not that
dial, if
great.
you will.
Yeah, the dial will either go one way or the other of being like, it's fine, or it's fine. Like it just it depends on your how you say how fine it is, right? Like I don't know if
Harrison
anyone's
Ford,
going to be,
fine.
and I think hardcore fans who have been, I guess clamoring for this type of movie, because Uncharted didn't satiate that, the Tomb Raider movie didn't satiate that like I don't know what the best adventure movie of the last, I'm trying to think of Indiana Jones-esque movie
You're
of
not
the
gonna like
last
it. I think it's Mad Max Fury Road. That's just kind of like a very simplistic, from
yeah,
point A to point B.
true. Have all
And
Indiana Jones movies been like that? Because this one
yeah,
feels, someone did compare this to like a not as good version of Mad Max, because it is a constant chase movie throughout the whole
well,
thing.
that's what it's always been. It's always like the
He gets
one,
the MacGuffin and someone's chasing him the whole
or
time,
or he's
or
after the
he's after the
MacGuffin that he's
MacGuffin.
been
Yeah,
assigned. Like in Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Ark of the Covenant is something that he's chasing because the US government has asked him, and only him for some strange reason, to get this thing that Hitler is obsessed with, because if he grabs hold of it, he'll have this supernatural power potentially to destroy the world. And that's the other thing that is kind of, I think, worth mentioning, is that having had all these adventures, there is still a form of skepticism within Indiana Jones that I find very funny, that he's experienced all
he's
these.
still like, I don't know.
I've seen some things, but I still, ultimately, like, it's all a bunch of hooey, and like with that, it's kind of you can tell, like, someone like Chris Carter took a lot of influence from the X-Files, like when creating that show, where, government cover-ups and like potentially supernatural aspects, but even the conflict of both Mulder and Scully, Scully being kind of the more skeptical one that believes in science, even though she's someone of faith, and Mulder being someone who isn't of faith, but also believes in the possibilities of the unknown. And you kind of see that melding of how, like, Chris Carter separated the two to create those characters. I still think that the best Indiana Jones movie of 2023 is Blackberry, and that's just me.
Interesting. Did I freeze on your end? Because
You
my
did,
video is
you
frozen.
did. Your
All right,
your
great.
nose is like this, so
I know. I'm like rubbing my nose and then and that. So I'll keep talking as I try to fix this. I don't know how to though. I wonder if it's still recording my video or if I will just be frozen.
oh, you're
There I
back.
am. There we go.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I guess we can kind of wrap it up because we have to kind of dodge spoilers.
Say,
I don't
whip it
know.
up.
Yeah, when you talked about the supernatural element, it's something that I never thought of either, because that's such a prevalent, it's so funny how similar Uncharted is, or Tomb Raider is, because they all kind of have that same supernatural twist in the third act and stuff like that. And I usually like movies with what this movie is trying to play with, is something, and I don't want to give anything away. We've mentioned time and stuff like that, but
Well, it's
like,
taking real history, right? Like,
yeah.
there is an aspect of reality with the MacGuffin, being
Well, and
uh
all of the movies are like
yeah,
that, right?
yeah,
They're all like,
Archimedes'
yeah,
dial in
yeah,
this case, but there's always some truth, and then the truth kind of slowly becomes less grounded as the story progresses. But you kind of like that, because it is a way to inspire people to kind of get interested in history as a, a an entrance point, and
yeah.
you're kind of fascinated by that. I just want to quickly say, with Harrison Ford, there is something about his performance that does feel completely present. And you've been seeing that as of late. Now I haven't been watching Shrinking, and I know you
I
have.
think he's great in Shrinking. Like you can tell that like this guy at this point of his career isn't doing something just to do it. I think he's doing it because he wants to do it.
Yeah.
And I do think you can tell both in Shrinking and in this.
Well, even in The Force Awakens and Blade Runner 2049, he seemed more excited to be a part of those movies, where you go back again to the 2000s and into the early 2010s, the movies that he was making then, whether it be Hollywood Homicide or Paranoia, Firewall,
Cowboys and Aliens.
he was checked out. He was always just like, oh, I'm just here to, lend some gravitas as a legacy
Ender's
actor.
Game, remember?
Yeah, and I think it was actually around the time of Expendables 3 where it seemed like he started to have fun again. Because even
Yeah.
in that movie, like, he's not in it a lot, but he's kind of fun in that film. And like, these movies, even though a lot of them are just him kind of, revisiting characters that he made iconic in the 70s and 80s, there's like this twinkle in his eye, like an exciting kind of aspect of like, oh yeah, I remember when he was, and he still is a movie star. It's like there's no doubt about that. Like, even something as silly as Call of the Wild, there are moments in that movie,
Did I see that? I can't even remember. Did
oh
you
no,
review
we
it?
saw that in the theater. And
Yeah, we did, right?
because
Okay.
because that's the other thing. Like, I don't mean to
Oh yeah,
sound,
Buck.
yeah, like I'm objectifying Harrison Ford, but a part of what they do early on in this movie is that they show that, for an 80-year-old man, he's in amazing shape. Like, he's in
Yeah,
better
he's got
shape.
fucking abs. He's better shape than I am.
Yeah, he's better shape than like most 20 to 30-year-olds. But they
I'm
did
like,
that as well
fuck,
with Call of the Wild.
I love that he does a shirtless scene, and I'm
Yeah.
like, are you fucking kidding me? I'm like, Harrison Ford's ripped, bro, at 80. And I'm like, it made me feel so bad about
I
myself.
know. I
I'm
know. I was like, God damn it. But he is Harrison Ford. Like, he's still
yeah,
amazing.
yeah,
Still a handsome man. Like, he's just one of those guys that's like always been a movie star, but when he's a movie star that's interested in the material or cares about what he's doing, that's where it really does connect. And I just wish the movie had that same energy that he had, because
that's
when you're
fair.
making a movie, it's different from seeing the film, right? Like, you're only one part of, the puzzle. So I think he's good in the movie.
What the hell's a Red Hulk? God bless him. God bless him. Yeah, I think I've always loved Harrison Ford as well, and I mean, obviously being a huge Star Wars person, although I was never. You were either like a Luke Skywalker kid or a Han Solo kid, and I will admit I was more of a Luke Skywalker kid. I just like Jedi's more than um, scoundrels, I guess. But yeah, he's great. I think, he holds the movie together, right? Like if they would have done something different, like a reboot or a spin-off or something like that, like I don't know if that, I'm sure they will one day. I have no doubt that Disney will milk the Indiana Jones license for everything that it's got. So like I think they'll take some more time off again, and then whether it continues in the same universe with Phoebe Waller-Bridge or completely reboots it like there were rumors of with the Chris Pratt stuff. Thank God that never happened.
Oh God.
Um
Then
and
it would
things
be
like that.
faith-based.
God, no, please no. So yeah, I don't know where it goes in the future, but like yeah, I enjoyed my time with this. I think like I'm thinking of like my mom and people like that who were the perfect age when those original movies came out and were a big fan of the movies. Like I think they're going to enjoy this. Like I just have a good feeling that like that generation and my mom and my dad's generation that goes to see this movie, I think will have a good time with it. Like I don't think that they'll overanalyze it or get bored, or I think like from what I've heard from I think they'll enjoy the ride. Again, will it stick with people being one of the best Indiana Jones movies? No, it's probably going to be number 4 out of 5 for most people, but that's also okay. Like the
Or
first 3,
5 even.
like yeah, I know maybe. But like even for me, like I like Crystal Skull more than most people, just because I don't have that attachment. Where I didn't like the third Indiana Jones, which I think a lot of people do really like, and so it's just I don't know, but I enjoyed this. I think it was a fun-ish ride. Um, Again, a movie that I'm not necessarily going to think a lot about, but like I've said that in a negative sense, but in this way I mean it. And maybe if this franchise means more to you, then that is going to be more disappointing. But for me, it was like eat some popcorn, watch this movie. I like Harrison Ford. I like some of the sci-fi elements. Some of the action sequences are fun. The John Williams music we haven't talked about. Again, it sounds reminiscent of both him doing what he's done before, and also it reminded me a lot of his more recent stuff of like the Star Wars sequel scores and stuff like that. That's what I
It
got out of
but it
this.
doesn't have, because that original theme, Indy's
Oh yeah,
theme, is so iconic,
of
right?
course, yes.
But it doesn't have anything on the, like, it's competent, it's well done, it gets the job done, but it doesn't even have a Duel of the Fates-esque kind of like new
But then
riff
that's what I
in
mean by the
there.
sequel trilogy, because I feel like John Williams' sequel scores for Force Awakens, uh, uh, Last Jedi, and The Emperor's somehow Return.
Emperor's New Groove.
Yeah, I think are good scores, but I don't remember. I like
Yeah,
Ray's theme, the do do do
yeah.
do do. Like Ray's theme's great, and there's certain moments, but this I don't think has like a standout new piece of music that I can pull, like off the top of my head. But like I did notice during it, I'm like, this sounds like modern John Williams. Like it sounds like
Modern John.
those Star Wars sequel scores to me. Like even pieces of music felt like they were straight from those. And I mean, John Williams is going to sound like John Williams. I love him. He's a legend, but shares a birthday with me.
Yep, February
Um,
8th.
but yeah, so I guess that's the last thing I wanted to talk about was his score, which I think, was good. But again, like a lot of the movie, I
Serviceable.
think it's serviceable. That's what I almost feel like this movie is. To me, it's serviceable. So I'm going to give the movie, I'm being very kind, but I think it's like the most 7 out of 10 movie I've seen. So it's going to be a 3.5 out of 5 for me. Like it could teeter on that 3 range, but I'm going to give it a 3.5 because like I did enjoy myself. So that's where I stand.
I want to ask you a question before I give my final rating, because I think
Yeah.
you brought up something that is really, again, it doesn't change the quality of the film, but I think it will affect the box office. Is that you mentioned your parents, and I talked about my dad being a huge fan of it, and my mom's a huge Harrison Ford fan. These are the people that I think, this is the demographic, the baby boomers and, the
Mm-hmm.
generations a little bit under them, that are most excited or intrigued,
For
or
this.
will show up for it. But do you think that audience will show up for it? Because it does feel like going to the movies now, there's a younger audience that is kind of showing up post, when I say post pandemic, like, where we are now. And it does kind of feel like a lot of the people that are of a certain age will feel like, oh, well, they'll look at the running time and they'll be like, oh, maybe that's a little too long. And all the distractions that are in movie theaters nowadays. And then on top of that, we've talked a lot about it with Pixar, is
Yeah.
that the Disney Plus element. So if you have
People
Disney
waiting.
Plus, that might be like, I love Indiana Jones and all that, but I rather just wait until, because I own Disney Plus. I don't want to pay, X amount of money to go and see it, and parking and babysitters if I have to do that, or, those kind of things.
I think that's an interesting question because you are making great points, but to counteract that or counterpoint that, like, has there been a boomer blockbuster in a long time? So
Well, I guess
maybe that
Top Gun
does get
Maverick is
people.
that,
Yeah,
right?
and there's a big, like that's the biggest movie of the last, God, who knows how long, but um so yeah, I do think that they'll show up. Like I don't think the Pixar thing works as a comparison because I think there's a precedent of that families got used to Pixar movies coming out on Disney Plus. It's not like we've gotten a bunch of Indiana Jones things that went straight to Disney and then we go, well, that's where I watch that stuff now. And I do think that, people of our parents' generation, like they only go to the movies usually a couple times a year, if that, right? Like for the I mean, obviously there's going to be exceptions to that rule. My mom goes to the movies all the time. Movie fans and cinephiles go to the movies all the time, but I'm talking like that average. And I think that's a bigger conversation I would love to have on maybe a main show or something sometime, because I think when you're seeing with the Flash and bombing and Elemental not working, which we just were talking about a little bit. It's like there's there's so much now, and we've talked about that on the TV side, but on movies as well. I was reading, and sorry, I can't credit the person. I don't know if it was a tweet thread or an article I was reading, but they're like, blockbusters used to be like we got a couple per summer, right? Like maybe a handful, but like it was like every couple weeks we got one, and it was like a must-see movie. You had to go if you were a movie fan, you'd go see it. Everyone talk about it for a few weeks. Where now it feels like every fucking week there's just like you have to be a fan of every franchise, and there's a big gigantic $200 to $300 million every week, and they're wondering why people aren't going. It's like, yeah, people don't go to the movies every week. Yeah, me and you do. And probably people listening to this show do, but like you got to think the average moviegoer goes maybe once a month, and then a lower grade of that is like maybe a couple times a year they go and they choose their handful of movies. So like Top Gun Maverick was one of those movies where the boomer generation came out. Everyone came out for that one. Is Indiana Jones going to be that? I don't think so. But with a schedule now where we have so much every week, right? Like a giant movie every week, that you're bound to have some flops. And The Flash was a victim of that, I think, because we had Spider-Verse a couple weeks earlier that did very well, a superhero movie with a multiverse plot. And it's just like, I just saw a good one of those 2 weeks ago. And I don't think Keaton's Batman, love him, but I don't think that was, there's a connection to Indiana Jones a little bit of like, did enough people have this reverence for that character to be like, I need to go see the Flash because he shows up, and it showed up? That no, they didn't. So I don't know with Indiana Jones. I
I
think
disagree
it's
with
a
that. I
different.
think the problem with that, though, is that nobody cares about the Flash as a character.
I
So
agree,
even
but
when
I
you're
just
putting in Batman, you're kind of like, well, we'll just make it a Batman movie. Like if
I
they said that
agree,
they were
but
bringing Tim Burton back to direct Batman 3, I think people
that would
would
do
go to
better than
that.
the Flash. I agree. I
Yes.
agree. But still, Keaton being in it, in the bat suit, being a prominent part, should have brought those
Yeah.
people out too, Eric, even though it was a Flash movie.
Don't
And
lie
they
to me,
just said,
Matt.
nah.
Don't lie to me.
And they were like, no, I don't want this.
Yeah.
And that's the DC. Every movie is different and every brand is different, but you got like, there's so much, dude. There's so much every week. Like it needs
Because
to,
also why
I
I was just
go
gonna say,
ahead.
like, also why I asked that is because I look at a younger generation. I look at, like
This movie cost $300
later,
million as well.
yeah,
Like,
you know, uh, older millennials or younger millennials are like at tail end of being a millennial, and Gen Z. It's like
yeah.
they're looking at this and thinking to themselves, like, there are people that have inherited from their parents and have found Indiana Jones through Harrison Ford because of Blade Runner and Star Wars and things like that. But are there that many people in that age demographic of, like, let's say, like 20 or even teens, that are interested in an Indiana Jones movie,
No. And
especially when they're, yeah,
that's where you're gonna see this kind of, it's not gonna hit those gigantic numbers because of it. And that's what I think, that $300 million um cost for the movie. And like, I think it says, from an article on June 8th from the Hollywood Reporter, it's pacing to open between 60 and $70 million over the June 30th to
yikes.
June 2nd weekend, which is like, it for a $300 million movie, that's a little low. And I think the reviews will hurt it a little bit too, because I feel like Crystal Skull people were burned by, right? And then if
Mhm.
this is getting the reviews aren't as negative as they were when they came out of can, but they're not great, right? Like it's not like it's like, fuck, this is an Indiana Jones movie, you gotta go see this.
Can was
It's
wrong.
great. It's like, yeah, those yeah, those pretentious
Those
film critics don't know
entitled
what they're talking
critics.
about. But like it's still getting like mixed reviews, right? Like it's got a 54% on, or 61%, because reviews are starting to come out. So it's teetering on that fresh category because 60%. But like,
Yeah.
and I hate to throw so much on Rotten Tomatoes, but that is how if you think about how modern audiences decide what movies to go see, right? Like that's the first place they go, dude. And that's unfortunate, but like I think there's value in Rotten Tomatoes. I really do, as an aggregate. I just don't think a lot of people understand exactly what that percentage means, right? Like, so, and we've talked about that a lot too, where they see 50% and they think it's a 5 out of 10 movie. It's like, no, that means half of the people thought it was a 3 or better, right? Like,
Yeah.
which is it. I just don't think a lot of people get that. So a 50% means, well, like 1 out of every 2 people liked it. So you should just go probably decide on yourself, and you might like it, you might not. Where the higher that percentage goes, the more likely you are to at least think it's a 3 out of 5. It's essentially what that meter means. But I still think when people see 61%, especially that younger generation, like the older generation, I think will go and see the movie no matter what because of Harrison Ford, because it's another Indiana Jones movie. But I don't think that audience is big enough to make this like a gigantic hit. And I do think that they might have made more money if it was a reboot, if it was, recasted with a younger actor, and depending on who that is, and stuff like that, then maybe you get more of that audience. But I don't even think Indiana Jones is in that same level as a Star Wars, or that's maybe me personally, but like I just like of a bigger audience. And this is an interesting conversation because my friends at Kind of Funny were talking about this, because they were more talking about it on the video game side of things, because they're making an Indiana Jones video game for Xbox. And then it's funny because and Tim being our age, in his mid 30s, was arguing with Blessing and Snowbike Mike about the value of the Indiana Jones IP on for video game fans, right? Of being like, the company that is making the Indiana Jones game is the company that made Wolfenstein. So they made the most recent Wolfenstein games, and they were arguing of what would people care more about, a new Indiana Jones game or Wolfenstein 3, because the first two Wolfenstein video games were pretty popular. People enjoyed them, right? And Tim was saying that Indiana Jones is more valuable, where Mike and Blessing, who are Mike's more around our age, but Blessing's a little bit younger, were arguing that Wolfenstein mattered more, and no one gives a shit about Indiana Jones, right? Like,
Yeah.
especially like they're like, no one, like, no offense to it, they're like, it's, but like video game fans, I think, don't care. Like, that's not necessarily going to be like, oh fuck, I gotta buy an Xbox because there's an Indiana Jones game out, right? And we've already had the
They're
Uncharted
not
games and
jonesing
stuff like
for it.
that. Yeah, so I think that's like this IP. I hate to boil it down to just that, but like it is an interesting one, and I'm very curious of how this movie will do, because I do think it's smart to market it towards our, that our parents' generation and things like that. And they did come out for things like Top Gun, but then Top Gun was also introduced to a whole new generation, and people fell in love with that movie of all ages, right? So, and I don't know if this movie's necessarily doing that. Like, it's obviously not on the same level, and so yeah, I don't know. I think that is an interesting question, but
Yeah, and just going to that conversation about video games as well, and I think that that's an interesting conversation to have, because it's like, it's not, I don't know if it's the same company or not, but like, even again, we've been talking about, the influence that Indiana Jones and Raiders have had over the decades, where you know the 30s and 40s movies and serials that inspired Indiana Jones, nobody talks about anymore, right? They would
yeah,
rather, the people that saw Indiana Jones, that saw those movies, would be like, oh, I'd rather have another Indiana Jones movie than a 40s or 30s serial character come back, into
yeah,
prominence. Now I think it's like, okay, well, with like the video game thing, or even with movies, it's almost more like, again, just going with video games here, it's like, what would you rather see, another Uncharted video game, or Tomb Raider game, or an Indiana Jones game? And I think the
most
generations
people
now
would
would
say
pick
Tomb Raider or
Tomb Raider
Uncharted.
or
Yeah,
Uncharted, because that's their Indiana Jones. And so,
yeah.
like, even with,
What?
moving outside of that, I was just going to say, with Phoebe Waller-Bridge, like, they're trying to bring some credibility there with, like, Fleabag is an amazing show. It's an incredible piece of writing, directing, acting. Like, it's amazing. I think, like, that's trying to, bridge the line between commercial and critics, and try to bring in some more gravitas. And as much as I love her on that show, and it's her, it's hers through and through, I kind of feel with this, like what you were talking about, like if they had hired somebody that is like, and I hate thinking this way, but like if they hired someone that was like a big name, somebody that was recognizable now to that generation, maybe that would bring in that audience as well, where I don't think Phoebe Waller-Bridge is going to bring
They
in,
tried that with Shia
you know,
LaBeouf though, right? Like, and
they
I think
did,
at that time with
and that was when Spielberg
Transformers
was in
and
love with him too, right? So it
how
kind of
they
feels
write
like
him out
that.
of this movie hilarious. Poochie went back to his home planet. It's like it's so
So there's
funny.
a lot going
But
on there where it does feel like it is riding on the original IP, the fact that Harrison Ford, has been so kind of excited and open to discuss the film and the process of the making it and everything. But then, yeah, there's part of it where you just feel like, even with the Rotten Tomatoes thing, like I think that that's a really important conversation that you always have to remind people that just because a positive review goes to a percentage, it doesn't necessarily mean that the positive review is a glowing one. Like, even, your review, like you're positive on it, but you're like, yeah, it's fine. It's okay for what it is. And I would give it a
yeah.
passing
And what
mark.
happens if 98% of people said that? Oh, it's a 3 out of 5. It's
Exactly.
okay. That means it would have a 98% on Rotten Tomatoes if everyone
Yeah.
gave it a 3 out of 5. So
See, that's
it's
where
a
the
weird.
subtlety and nuance comes in film criticism. You can't homogenize these things in that way. You have to go to the individual review and read a positive review that might be kind of lukewarm, that's still passable, but like actually read it and
Mhm.
learn, like, okay, well, why are they giving this thing a pass? And why is this still, you know, somewhat maybe okay, middle of the road, a mid movie, as the kids would say these days. And that's kind of where I am, but I'm more negative because I think of just the disappointment of, having that initial connection, where watching this to me just kind of felt like I was watching another Uncharted, or I actually like the
Hmm.
Alicia Vikander Tomb Raider movie more than this. So that's why I'm giving it a 2 out of 5. And that's why
Ooh,
as well,
yeah,
like I'm just
that's
like
fair.
so disappointed in it. So
Yeah, that's fair. And I mean, what was disappointing about Uncharted for me, the movie, is that it didn't learn the games learned so much from the Indiana Jones movies, and basically were just modern day clones of that, where the movie didn't at all, and they did something completely different. You're like, why didn't you just copy an Indiana Jones movie but set it in modern day? It's just like it was wild. That movie was more disappointing to me than this, because this, I'm like, oh, it feels like Indiana Jones, where that should have felt like Indiana Jones and felt like something completely generic. So yeah, I don't know. I understand where you're coming from as well. Thank you all for watching or listening. We really do appreciate it. We have many more reviews that you guys can go check out right now. It's like we said, there's new big movies every single week, it seems like, this summer, and there's just more and more of them. So you can check out a review of Wes Anderson's Asteroid City, Pixar's Elemental, the aforementioned The Flash, Marvel Studios' Secret Invasion on the TV side of things, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, Transformers Rise of the Beast for some other time MacGuffins, Fast X, things like that. So go check out all of those reviews. One-stop shop for everything over on Letterboxd, which is untitled_movies. And if you want to find more of my work, you can find it around the internet, but mostly right here at the Untitled Movie Podcast. And you can follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And I'm Eric March, and you can find more of my video reviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on all the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
Dr. Jones, calling Dr. Jones, Dr. Jones, Dr. Jones, wake up now.